I'm going to record it and then post it later. So anyway, because we've had a couple of folks that Miss Faye can't be here and she's asked for us to do that. So hopefully I'll get that up to our YouTube channel tonight. So anyway, well, we're going to be looking tonight at the Ark of the Covenant. Does anybody need a sheet, by the way, or did everybody get one? If you need one, they're by the door there. We've been, of course, last week we talked about as an overview of all the pieces, parts that God has given to Moses when he's given these instructions on how to build the tabernacle. And he lists all of them, and as we said before, we will be looking at the fact that each one of these things that God instructs Moses to build they have a very specific purpose in doing this. And so tonight we're going to begin with the Ark of the Covenant. If you remember, I said a couple weeks ago that when he began showing that he begins with the ark and ends up going out through the courtyard and to the very end. Man, on the other hand, has to begin at the gate or the courtyard, the beginning of the courtyard, and ends up at the Holy of Holies where the Ark of Covenant is. And so God, in his purpose here, he understands that most of us have a place or would like to have a place where we can get alone and quiet, and a place where we can think and work through our problems. And some of you, it might be a closet, some of it might be just your chair, and as I said before, that's what I have. Is I have my chair, my spot, and that's the reason I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, is so that I've got that time and I don't have to worry about the people. If somebody calls me at 4 o'clock in the morning, that usually means there's an emergency. But we look at this and realize that we all need that. We all need, and that place is kind of that hallowed ground, and it's special to us. And that's what this is here in the closing verse of chapter 24. We see that Moses went up the mountain. And it simply says in verse 18, and Moses went into the midst of the cloud and gat him up into the mount, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. And in that time, he received these instructions. And he was given, now I don't know, history does not tell us, and the Bible does not tell us that I'm aware of, that he wrote all of this stuff down. He may have. But we know that he also came down with what we call the Ten Commandments, or the book of the law. But then all of these instructions, it's almost like God gave him such a great memory that he was able to go back and do this. And so part of those instructions that God gave him were how to build the ark and how to do this. So let's begin here in verse 10. And we're going to read through verse 22, and then we'll come back and look at the verses a little closer. He says, and they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, within and without shalt thou overlay it, and shalt make upon it a crown of gold round about. And thou shalt cast 4 rings of gold for it, and put them in the 4 corners thereof. And 2 rings shall be in the one side of it, and 2 rings on the other side of it. And thou shalt make staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with gold. And thou shalt put the staves into the rings by the sides of the ark, that the ark may be borne with them. The staves shall be in the rings of the ark, and they shall not be taken from it. And thou shalt put into the ark of the testimony which I shall give thee. And thou shalt make a mercy seat of pure gold. 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and a cubit and a half the breadth thereof. And thou shalt make 2 cherubims of gold, of beaten work shalt thou make them, and in the 2 ends of the mercy seat. And make one cherub on one end, and the other cherub on the other end. Even of the mercy seat shall ye make the cherubims on the two ends thereof. And the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be. And thou shalt put the mercy seat above the ark, or upon the ark, above on the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel. Now, he begins here in verse 9, and actually afterwards, he says, all right, this is how you are to build this. And so he begins to explain, first of all, this pattern or this model. In verse 9, according to all that I show thee after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so. He says, I have very specific instructions and very specific things that I want you to understand, that I want you to do. You see, think about this from the ark standpoint. God gives all of these instructions, but then apply that to us in that God alone determines how we are to approach him. Why? Because he's God. He's sovereign. And so therefore, he has all of this. He has all authority to do so. And in fact, this is the first time here in verse 9 that the word tabernacle is used in Scripture. And we know that that word tabernacle means dwelling place or tent. And it's a place of where that man can come together. But since it is God's dwelling place, he makes the rules. He has the right to plan and design it and all of its furnishings. You see, it wouldn't be right if I were to go into Miss Sue's house and say, I don't like that room, let's fix that. I don't like these furnishings over here. I don't like these things. I have no right to do that. Why? Because it's not my house. She and Jeff paid for it. They're the ones, they have the right to say how that place looks and what it should be. You see, and that's the same way it is with God. He says, I will show you the plan. I'll show you the design. You build it according to my plan and my design. And, again, the application here is very clear in that the tabernacle was the place where a person approached God. They came to meet God. And so therefore, again, he alone determines how that we are to approach him. And of course for us, there's only one way to approach, and that is through Christ alone. And so as we look at this and we go through these things, we know that this tabernacle, this was to be his place, the very special place. Because the people came there for several reasons. To seek God's forgiveness, to seek his presence, to seek his guidance, his help, his strength. All of those things, that's what they came for, just like us. When we go before God, we're not going out of habit, or at least I hope we're not. We're going because we want that time with him. That's our desire. When you're married, you don't spend time with your wife out of habit. Well, we're not supposed to, but sometimes we do, I guess. But but the idea is that we are to desire those things. We're to desire that. And so God, as he gives these instructions, not just only for the ark, but for all of this, keep those things in mind, that these things have the purpose of drawing man to God. Notice in verse 10, he starts this instruction. He says, of course, we know that the ark was the most important piece of furniture in the tabernacle. It was, again, to represent the very presence of God. It was, and the throne of God, it was representing the mercy seat of God. You see, we don't often understand mercy. We give it, we think we do. But when we realize just who we are, when we realize all the things that we've done, oh my, the mercy that we need, the mercy of God. And And so this is the place, this ark this is where God was said. He says, I'm going to live. I'm going to dwell among you in this place. And so, it being the most precious place because God literally was there, it was obviously the centerpiece. And every piece of furniture, every other piece of furniture that we find in the tabernacle pointed toward and focused its attention upon the ark. And so, in fact, until Solomon built the temple, God focused his presence upon that Ark of the Covenant. And again, that's why the name or the room of where this was kept was called the Most Holy Place, or the Holiest of Holies. And so, in fact, the Ark is so significant, it's mentioned over 200 times in Scripture. And so, notice here the Ark of Covenant. Oh, well, it timed out on me. Hope y'all can see that. Notice the description of it, because it was not. It says it was 2.5 cubits. Anybody know how long a cubit is? Yeah, from a man's tip of the elbow to the tip of the fingers, approximately 18 inches was that was the average, I think. So if you figure that at 2.5 cubits long, or that's 45 inches, it was 27 inches wide and 27 inches tall. Now, when you think about that, we'll back up one here, and we see this and we think it's a lot bigger. But you got to remember, this is made out of the acacia wood or shittim wood, whichever one you want to call it, which is that very hard wood that. And then he says, remember the box, this bottom box here was made of the wood, and it was overlaid in gold. Again, that's just going to be heavy because it's overlaid, in gold. And then, I wish this thing would do it. It won't.
You want him to go present it?
Yeah, Jeff.
That way we can see it better.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize it was going to do that after. Not necessarily, unless y'all just want it. Jeff, there is right here where it says present, because this is online because it's the free one. Just click on that. It should. There it goes. Okay. We'll get there. Okay. Now maybe you can see it a little better. Thank you, sir. But he says that it's made out of the shittim wood or the acacia wood. The box itself is hewn out of that. It's overlaid with gold. It's now inside and out is gold. Okay, so there were no corners to be cut. He said there in verse 11. He said, overlay it with pure gold. Within and without shalt thou overlay it, and shalt thou make upon it a crown of gold round about. Now, that's this. Sorry. That's this lip right here that you're seeing along this edge. And so he says, then this thing's not doing what it's supposed to. But that gold crown, that molding around the edge of the top, but then these 4 gold rings, come on, there it is. The gold rings here on each corner, so that these poles are permanently installed in there. You have to remember that those poles, those are made out of the acacia wood or shittim wood, and of course overlaid with gold. And once they were inserted into those rings, they would never ever come out. Those are the only part of the ark that man was ever to touch. Because if you remember, the young man, my brain just went blank on his name. Uzzah, yeah, thank you. That, David was bringing the ark back to Jerusalem, and he was doing it the wrong way, is in the wrong manner. But then the ark, the cart on which the animals were pulling, it went over a bump, a hit, I guess, and he thought it was going to tip over, and out of instinct, I believe, just like us, he just was, and God killed him instantaneously. That's how serious God is about this. And so, but then, he said he would give the instructions on what to put in it later on. And of course, we know later on, did anybody remember what's in it? Aaron's rod. Ten Commandments.
A couple of mouses in there. Mice.
Oh.
Yeah, from the Philistines, remember?
Mm-mm.
David brought it back, yeah, they put them gold mice in there.
Oh, okay, yeah. But that's not what was intended to be in there.
Wow, you
Yeah.
said what was in it?
Oh, yeah. But you're right. Aaron's rod, 10 Commandments, and a bowl of manna. And, again, and actually, if you read in Deuteronomy, because other folks may say something, is in Deuteronomy 31, it describes the book of covenants. Some people say that those are in there, but that's not what they were actually, if you read that technical language there, it's actually placed beside it versus being placed in it. So really just those three things, Aaron's rod, the 10 Commandments, and that pot of manna. And so, but then notice he describes this mercy seat. There's those, some people call it the atonement cover. Notice in verse 17, he says, "Thou shalt make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1.5 cubits the breadth thereof." In other words, obviously to sit on top of the ark. Now, this was to be made out of one piece of gold that was hammered into this shape. Can you imagine having... God gave these, he says later on that he gave them the craftsman and the understanding and the knowledge on how to make, how to do these things. But they had all of this gold. Where did it come from? From Egypt, from the Egyptians. You remember, it says that God gave them, favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, so that they were able to essentially rob them. I mean, I know that sounds wrong, but that's essentially what they did. They went to the Egyptians and said, "Can we have so-and-so?" And they're like, "Here, take it all." That's just, the way it was. So, but this mercy seat is the idea here. The Hebrew word for that means covering or atonement. The idea is the covering of sins, or the atonement of a reconciliation being made possible by God. We know that forgiveness and reconciliation were made possible. How? Because of the blood of the sacrifice. The fancy preacher term we have for that is propitiation. And so it was because the blood, the sacrifice, when the high priest took that one day of year on the Day of Atonement, he took the blood and he had that sacrificial lamb and he took it into the Holy of Holies and he sprinkled that upon the mercy seat. The idea being that God would see that, and because that was where he dwelt, and so he would see that, and he would then roll their sins forward, essentially, 1 year. And so then, of course, we know that Christ, being the ultimate sacrifice, that's what he did. In his death on Calvary, he paid the ultimate cost, so that the sprinkling upon the mercy seat would not have to be anymore. If you remember the video that we watched the very first night, it had where the priest was touching. He dipped his finger. I don't know if you noticed that, but he dipped his finger in the blood, and then he actually touched the mercy seat. No, that has to be inaccurate, simply because no one can touch the ark, any part of it, other than those handles and the four corners. And so the idea here of mercy seat is to cancel or to annul or appease. And, so because we know, again, at the mercy seat, that is where God covers man's sin. That is where he cleanses and forgives and pardons and puts our sin off. And he makes atonement and reconciles us to himself. And so, in fact, Matthew Henry, in his commentary on this, he makes this statement. He says, the mercy seat was the covering of the ark of the chest made of solid gold, exactly to fit the dimensions of the ark. This propitiatory covering, as it might well be translated, was a type of Christ, the great propitiation, whose satisfaction fully answers the demands of the law, covers our transgressions, and comes between us and the curse that we deserve. Thus, he is the end of the law for righteousness. And so, he says here that it is specifically designed to fit that ark. It was for that and nothing else. But notice it had these cherubim, and they point toward one another. It's hard to see on this end, but you can see the head is facing, actually, you notice it's facing downward toward the mercy seat. And I don't know if these tips, the wing tips actually touched. He doesn't specifically say that in his description or his instructions that we have. But think about these. These were first seen, cherubim were first seen where? Anybody remember? At the entrance of the Garden of Eden. When he sent Adam and Eve out of the garden, remember what he said? He placed cherubim at the entrance with a flaming sword to keep man from going back into the garden. And so the fact that it was made, and that was, this is a guard, if you will, upon the mercy seat. And the fact that it was made of pure gold, it helps us to view this as God's divinity in relation to righteousness. Because without divine righteousness being satisfied by the shedding of blood and the application of blood, we know that there could be no outflowing of grace to us as guilty man and woman. But then notice again, he says in verse 21, "And the cherubims shall stretch forth their wings on high, covering the mercy seat with their wings, and their faces shall look one to another. Toward the mercy seat shall the faces of the cherubims be." Again, the idea is God, here's the mercy seat. There's a place for them to focus, and to remember what had been done, or that we should remember what is, the mercy seat, the sacrifice that was made. But here's the whole point, is that our sin has separated us from God. There was a great gulf between man and God. And in fact, we know that it's so vast, it keeps us from reaching God. There's no way possible that we can do that. And, we know that gulf is sin. And, it condemns us to death because but we know there's hope. And that's what this is a reminder of. It's a reminder of the hope that we have in the mercy of God. Because without mercy, we would have nothing. It wouldn't be possible. And it's because of his mercy that we're saved. In fact, if you want to turn over to Ephesians chapter 2, I want to read a passage there to help us to see this a little better, I hope. Ephesians 2, beginning in verse 4. Probably Ephesians 2 and verse 4 is possibly the favorite verse of all that I have in all of the Bible. Ephesians 2 and verse 4, he says, "But God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us." Then he goes on, he says, "Even when we were dead in sins, hath quickened us together with Christ. By grace ye are saved, and hath raised us up together, and made us sit together in heavenly places in Christ Jesus, that in the ages to come he might show the exceeding riches of his grace in his kindness toward us through Christ Jesus. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus unto good works, which God hath before ordained that we should walk in them." If you read that text there that Paul wrote, think about this, that the mercy of God invites us to approach God in order to receive more mercy and help us in our time of need. And that's what it boils down to. And so his mercy has no end. And I'm so grateful. I am so grateful, because if it had end, I would have been used it up a long time ago. So, all right. Any thoughts before we move on to
You talk about the Garden of Eden, and I may be wrong, doesn't it speak that they face four different ways, or four ways outwards? Or is that another scripture I'm thinking of, to look every direction? There's somewhere that talks about they look in every direction.
they are at the entrances, at the four entrances of the garden.
That's
But again, the purpose was to keep them out, because if you think about it, if man went back into that garden, sinful, and ate of the fruit of the tree of life, live forever. We'd live forever in this. I don't know that I want to do that, because that's too much. But then notice, he goes on in verse 21. And he talks about this mercy seat. He said, "Thou shalt put the mercy seat above the ark, and in the ark thou shalt put the testimony that I shall give thee. And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat, from between the two cherubims which are upon the ark of the testimony, of all things which I give thee in commandment unto the children of Israel." Now notice here how God has clearly spelled out why he planned and designed this ark to the way he did. First of all, he says it was to hold the testimony of God, and we know in the form of the Ten Commandments. And we know that they were the basic laws of man. All of our laws today are based from those 10, period. And so I don't care what the government says. They may say, well, no, every one of them, they're based from those 10 commandments. And therefore he says we're to keep those laws. Man was to keep them, therefore they were to be preserved and contained in the very throne of God himself, because God's going to, it's where he's going to reside. They were going to be under his watchful care. And we know, again, there's other things in the ark itself. But then notice something else. He says the ark was to be the place, that very special place, where God met with his people. And he says, "And there I will meet with thee, and I will commune with thee from above the mercy seat. You know, the people knew that that's where God was going to be. They knew. Moses told them, and God made it very clear, that's where they were going to be. So therefore, they, you know, when they knew that, so they had a very special sense of God's presence, a very special closeness to, you know, that they knew because they could go there. And they knew that. They couldn't go in the Holy of Holies, but they could go. It's kind of like, you know, we call our worship, our, you know, building over here, we call that a sanctuary. And that word is used for a purpose, because the idea is that, yes, but we come to worship. We come to be with Him. We come to, you know, that's the whole idea, is to come to be with God. Yes, we have our moments, our place at home, our quiet place, but, you know, these people, they would go to the tabernacle, the ground around it, and they would worship, and they would seek forgiveness by offering the sacrifice to the Lord. And of course, as we said, only the high priest could enter the Holy of Holies. But the people, they could come, and they could, you know, it would be, they just had that opportunity there to be able to come and to worship, because that something they could see, a place they could go. But then notice he goes on and he says, he said, and from between the two cherubims which are, he says, upon the ark, of all the things which I give thee in the commandment unto the children of Israel. He says, I'll meet you there. He said, because that's the place that I want to do. You know, it was a place of mercy. It was a place that, you know, the priest was to sprinkle that blood, and so that, again, the sins of the people will be rolled forward. And, you know, of course, the idea here was the sprinkling of the blood was meant to teach the people that their sins were atoned for because of blood. And, you know, that the purpose, they would look forward to Christ on the cross. And so, you know, and that they were, you know, that God's mercy had been showered upon them because of that blood. And so, you know, again, there's a couple of really meaningful pictures, I believe, that are seen here in the mercy seat. First of all, the mercy seat points us toward the finished work of Christ. It's, you know, think about this. The priests were continually offering. You know, the Day of Atonement was once a year, but those priests every day were burning, and they were offering sacrifices out, and as we'll see later on in that big altar outside. And, you know, their work was never done. But not so with Christ. Christ, when he was on the cross, remember his words that he said? It is finished. That's what he meant when he says it is finished, is that there will be no more sacrifices. There's no need for more sacrifices. I am the ultimate sacrifice, because his sacrifice was perfect, and therefore that's one picture. But then secondly, there's another picture that points toward God's mercy covering the law. What does the law require? Perfection. It requires perfection. You know, I think I've mentioned this before. If I pull up to that stop sign out there in my car, what does it mean? Stop. Doesn't mean to ease up there and roll on through. It means stop. It requires, the law that says stop requires perfection. And that's what he's saying here. You know, no person is perfect. The law requires that perfection. And so therefore, if no person can keep that perfect law, then how do we ever become acceptable to God? How do we ever do that? Through the mercy that's given to us through Jesus Christ. Remember what Paul said there in Galatians chapter 4. He said that when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. You know, that's the purpose. But then notice in verse 22, this was to be the place where God not only would provide the mercy, but he would instruct and guide his people from this point. He says, I will commune with thee. I'll meet with you there. I'll give you the instructions. I will show you. Again, it was to be a symbol of the throne of God. You know, it was from there that he'd give Moses all the rules, everything that he ever needed to lead that people. Can you imagine Moses? My goodness. You know, it's hard to think about leading, you know, if you're a supervisor. How many employees you got, Miss Sue, approximately? That you,
We have about 600.
can you imagine leading all 600 of those? What, can you imagine leading multi-millions of hard-headed, stiff-necked, as he calls them? He said, Moses, I'm going to meet you here. I'm going to give you the instructions. I'm going to show you that no matter the trial, no matter the difficulty, I'm ready to help the children. I'm ready to help these guys. This would ultimately be, even though the people couldn't go, but this is ultimately the place where God would meet the children of Israel. And that's the purpose. It was a special thing. Building it was even more special as Israel realized that God was coming to them in a special way. They've been in slavery for 400 years. They've been out there. They need leadership. They need somebody to guide them. You know, and I think about the fact that for us, how wonderful it is to know that the ultimate sacrifice has been made. We don't have to go through this anymore. We don't have to go through these things. And so, you know, we simply just now have to surrender to him. Any thoughts, comments, questions Ronnie can answer?
I've got a question. It may not make any sense. This tabernacle that they built, they carried it place to place.
Correct.
Once they got to the promised land, what happened to the tabernacle? If they did build a temple, all right?
Correct, but not until Solomon.
Okay.
Solomon was the one that was allowed, and it was the tabernacle was there, and it stayed in one spot. But the actual temple was not built until, you know, God allowed Solomon to do it.
I know in the temple, they had the Holy of Holies when Jesus said it is finished. The veil was torn.
Right.
The Orthodox Jews today, they don't have that. What do they look to? Jesus wasn't the Christ. How do they lead God?
They hope. They don't have, because they don't have the temple now, because the second temple was torn down. You know, the Roman soldiers went through it and basically tore stone from stone, the Bible says. But now I've been told, and I don't know for sure, but I've been told that all the parts are ready for the third temple to be built, sitting in warehouses in Jerusalem. But it can't be built right now because the Temple Mount is currently where the Dome of the Rock is, which is the Islamic. And so therefore, they're just waiting. They're waiting. But this, you know, this stayed in function until Solomon was able to build the temple there.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, when Noah built the ark and everybody was wicked and only 8 souls were saved, and God set the new covenant up then for them. And says every now and then on TV that they still look for that ark there, the covenant on top of Mount Ararat after the flood.
Mhm.
Is that what? Even though there was generations after Noah, generations after generations, since Christ was born. So, we hear nothing about it after the flood. He set a new covenant.
Right, now,
Put the rainbow in the sky and said it would never destroy again except by fire.
well, and the ark that you're talking about is the boat, you know, whereas this is the altar that was carried around, you know, and we don't know where this is either.
So, and they still looking for that to say.
Oh, yes.
Did they not have it for generations before Noah come, or did it get destroyed during the flood?
This was not until the Ark of the Covenant, or the ark, the boat ark that Noah built, was before this. This was generations after. The Ark of the Covenant was built. In fact, the children of Israel didn't exist.
That's
You
what I
know,
was trying to
right?
figure out.
Yeah, I mean they.
How close was it before Jesus was born? How many generations, you know?
Trying to remember. There's 60-something generations from Adam to Jesus. If I'm correct, I have to go back and verify. But then I don't know. I'd have to go back and count how many generations from Adam to Noah, and then Adam to Abraham and Moses, and you know, I mean, all of those, because it comes down, you know, Noah, and then later on is Abraham, later on is Moses and the children. Of course, we have to have Abraham first because he's the father of Israel. So, and then Moses came afterward. I don't know if that makes sense. So, yes, I mean, they're still looking. Archaeologists are still looking for the Ark of the Covenant. Nobody knows where it is. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of, you know, and they do go back to Mount Ararat looking for the boat, the Ark, and I don't know that they found that either for sure.
If you was to find the ark, would you wanna touch it?
Absolutely not. But it's because Christ's sacrifice, it's no longer necessary. And I believe, my opinion, now this is opinion according to Calvin, I believe that the Ark of the Covenant has disappeared because it's no longer necessary. Because we have Christ. Christ died upon the cross, paid the ultimate sacrifice. So therefore, there's no need for this. Anybody else?
I'm gonna say one more thing, I'm gonna hush. It's
Please do.
amazing the number of tools that they had, that they were able to do this. Melt this gold, melt it down, and be able to hammer it out into one piece.
God gave them the tools and the knowledge necessary. Because you think about this and you think about what it would be like, it's just amazing. Any others? All right, I got homework for you for next week. Next week, we're going to be looking at the table of showbread. I want you to read and study, if you will, the next from verses 23 through 30, Exodus 25, verses 23 to 30. Then I also want you to read Leviticus 24, verses 5 through 9. Read them, reread them, study them a bit, so that, because that's what we're going to talk about next time. And again, we're talking about the table of showbread, and you know, and we'll come back and let Ronnie answer all the questions for you. So, all right. Well, let's close out in prayer. Brother Jimmy, would you close us, please, in prayer?
Dear Lord, thank you for the day you